Have you ever caught yourself speaking out loud when no one else was there? Not shouting, not raving, not unraveling, just softly. Quiet words in an empty room. A whispered sentence while washing your face. A half-finished thought spoken into the mirror. The kind of moment you don't tell anyone about because you're not even sure why you do it. You're simply there, and suddenly there is another version of you present a voice that speaks, a voice that listens, a conversation that lives just beneath the skin. You might laugh it off when it happens, or you may grow still for a moment, suddenly aware of yourself because you know how society treats this. The world is quick to call you strange for it, quick to label it as loneliness or instability or evidence that something inside you has gone wrong. So you tuck the moment away like a secret, like something shameful, like something that shouldn't have happened. But you know, the truth, it didn't happen by accident. There is a reason the words slip out when your guard is down. Music, when you're overwhelmed, when your heart is heavy and you feel like no one really sees you. The voice you speak to is not imaginary. It is not delusion. It is the part of you that has lived every moment of your life, but rarely gets to speak. The child who learned to stay quiet. Music. The teenager who swallowed their feelings because they were too much. The adult who learned how to perform strength, efficiency, composure, music, even while storms raged silently underneath. Talking to yourself is not madness. It is the mind attempting to reunite with itself. It is your internal world trying to find alignment because somewhere along the way, your inner voice was pushed underground, and now it comes back in fragments, in whispers, in moments when no one else is around to interrupt. Think about those times when you argue with someone in your head long after the bay's conversation ended. When you rehearse what you'll say before walking into a room, when you soothe yourself in a moment of fear or doubt. When you repeat the same phrase over and over until your breath steadies. These are not accidents. These are survival strategies. Your self-talk has been your witness, your confidant, music, your guardian, especially in moments when the world felt too sharp to touch directly. And if you listen closely, you'll notice something. The voice you speak to isn't a stranger. It is you, the you that remains when the performance ends. The you that has been waiting to be acknowledged, too. Understand why this inner dialogue feels so natural and yet so private. We must go back to where your inner voice first learned to speak. Have you ever watched a child playing alone? Not just playing, but narrating, voicing every movement, every feeling, every small imagined world. A toy placed on the table becomes music, a character with a purpose. A whispered conversation unfolds between figures only the child can see. There is a gentle rhythm to it, an instinctive dialogue with the self. You once did this too before you learned silence. Before you learned to hide, a child speaks out loud because the mind is still learning how to hold itself together. Psychological development tells us that children externalize to thought before they can internalize emotion. Their voice is a bridge, a way to translate feelings into something they can understand. When the world feels too big, too loud, too uncertain, the spoken word becomes a tiny anchor in the storm. It's okay. We're fine. This goes here. The voice outside is training down the voice inside. But not every child receives the comfort of a voice from someone music else. Some grow up with parents who are physically present, but emotionally distant faces that look at them but never truly see them. Some grow up in homes where love is unpredictable, where affection depends on performance, where the child learns early that feelings music need to be hidden to avoid upsetting the fragile world around them. And some children are forced to mature too quickly, learning to understand, soothe, and navigate emotions alone, while their peers are still allowed to simply feel. So, the child begins speaking to themselves, not just playfully, but as a quiet form of survival. The voice becomes protector, companion, and witness. When no one asked how their day was, the voice did. When disappointment cracked something small inside the chest, the voice stitched it back together. When fear crept in at night, the voice whispered reassurance into the darkness. Slowly, the self became both caregiver and child. This is how the inner voice is born, not as something strange, but as something deeply human. It is the result of a mind that refused to collapse, a heart that refused to stay silent, a soul that would not let itself disappear. And over time, the child grows older, the toys fade, music, the imaginary worlds dissolve. And yet, the voice music remains no longer spoken in innocence, but now layered with memory, longing, and all the words never said out loud to anyone else. Childhood ends, but the need for comfort does not. And so the voice evolves, becoming quieter, more private, music, more shadowed to a secret conversation, carried into adulthood, waiting for the place gas moment it will finally be heard again. There comes a moment in life when you realize you've become very good at appearing composed. You know how to speak in the right tone, nod at the right time, hold your expression steady, even when something inside you twists. You know how to appear fine, but the voice inside you, the one that once spoke freely as a child, didn't disappear. It simply learned to hide behind the mask you wear for the world. You notice it most in quiet moments, standing in the bathroom, staring into the mirror longer than necessary, or in the kitchen late at night, when the day has already exhausted music, you, and the silence feels heavier than the darkness. You speak softly, privately, rehearsing what you wish you had said earlier or what you plan to say tomorrow. Music. You try to find the courage that didn't exist at the moment you needed it. The voice comes out, not because you are weak or strange, but because something inside you is trying to keep you from collapsing under the weight of your own expectations. Psychologists sometimes call this the internal dialogue, but there's more to it than that. It's not just one voice. It is many. There is the narrator, the voice that describes what you are doing, music, as though giving shape to your own existence. There is the shadow, voice, the one that holds your unspoken disappointments, anger, and unresolved grief. And then there is the inner parent, the voice that tries to soothe you when life feels too heavy or scolds to you when you believe you should have done better. These voices are not separate personalities. They are fragments of you, the pieces you had to separate just to survive. And so you talk to yourself when decisions feel overwhelming. You whisper, "It's okay," when no one is around to say it for you. You ask yourself questions out loud because answers feel more real when spoken. You argue with yourself because sometimes you are the only person who understands the complexity of what you feel. A maggiore di music is greater than. The world sees an adult performing normal life, but inside you are still negotiating with the child who once learned to hold everything alone. There is loneliness here, yes, but there is also resilience. The voice inside you is proof that you never abandoned yourself, even when others did. The mask you wear may be polished, calm, well-adjusted, but the voice behind it is raw and real, trying to pull the pieces of who you are back into alignment. To understand why this inner dialogue persists, why it feels necessary, instinctive, and deeply emotional, we must step into the realm of psychology and the science of the portnode to mind. Have you ever wondered why thoughts feel heavier when they stay silent? Why a problem when kept inside? Your head seems tangled and dense, but the moment you speak it aloud, even to know something begins to loosen. This is not accidental. The mind is not only a place of thought, music. It is a place of echo, reflection, and sound. Your voice is a tool, and speaking to yourself is one of the oldest ways the human brain organizes reality. Psychologists call it self-directed speech, a concept rooted in the work of Lev Vygotsky. He observed that children first speak music aloud to guide themselves through the world, to remind, to soothe, to understand. Over time, society teaches the child to silence this voice, to internalize it. But the mechanism remains. The voice never disappears. It simply retreats inward music, where it becomes the foundation of how you think about your own thinking. What neuroscience calls metacognition. Talking to yourself is the mind attempting to bridge the gap, music, between emotion and interpretation. When you speak aloud, your left brain, the analytical structured side, and your right brain, the emotional intuitive side, begin to communicate more clearly. The voice is not a sign of instability. It is the nervous system reaching for balance. Like two hands meeting in the dark, studies show that self-talk improves emotional regulation. Saying something out loud slows the nervous system, lowers cortisol, and helps the prefrontal cortex regain control from the amygdala, the part of your brain that reacts out of fear or instinct. This is why in moments of crisis, you whisper, "It's okay," even if you don't fully believe it. The body responds to the sound of your own reassurance. Music, it also strengthens memory. When you speak something out loud, you anchor it more deeply in your mind. Your voice becomes a marker, a place of return, like carving a small symbol into the wood of your life so you can find your way back when everything feels overwhelming. Music. But underneath all of this is something more intimate, something more fragile. The voice you speak music to is also the voice you have hidden, the parts of you that were silenced by expectation, music, disappointment, or fear. The inner dialogue reveals the fractures, music, the pieces of you that learned how to survive without being seen. So when you speak to yourself, you are not just thinking, you are remembering, reassembling, negotiating with the pieces of your own existence. And when the inner world is divided, when something inside you is unresolved, unspoken, or aching, the voice you speak aloud begins to reveal what you are most afraid to feel. Have you ever noticed how the voice you speak to, when no one is around, knows things you never say out to loud? It knows the disappointments you dismissed, the apologies you never received, the grief you never allowed yourself to feel fully. That voice is not just a habit. Music, it is a witness, one that has seen the version of you that the world never did. There are nights when you find yourself speaking into the quiet as if someone were sitting beside you. Not loudly, just a music, soft, tired confession. Words like "I'm trying" or "I don't know what else to do," or even the silence between sentences, the kind that holds more truth than any language could translate. In those moments, you are not talking to the air. You are speaking to the part of yourself that has carried every hurt without complaint. Psychologists say unresolved emotions do not disappear. They sink, they settle, they wait. Shame becomes a shadow that follows quietly behind you. Loneliness becomes a subtle ache in the ribs. Grief becomes a room in the house of your mind that you never fully enter. And when these feelings have no place to go, when there is no one safe enough to hear them, they look for the only presence that has always remained you. So the voice becomes a confessor, a listener, a kind of invisible companion. You return to, because no one else has ever stayed as consistently. Sometimes it soothes you. Sometimes it hurts you. Sometimes it reminds you of everything you've tried to forget. It becomes a mirror. You didn't ask for one that reflects music, not who you pretend to be, but who you are when the performance ends. And yes, there is pain in that, because speaking to yourself can also mean admitting that there are parts of your life where you were alone, when you shouldn't have been. Moments when you needed someone to say, "I see you," and no one did. So the voice in your chest took the place of love that never came, comfort, music that was never offered, presence that never arrived. It became your replacement for intimacy. Talking to yourself is not strange, but it is private because it carries the private because it carries the private weight of everything you've held in, silence. And the world does not know how to hold the kind of honesty that exists in those moments. Society hears self-T, talk, and thinks of instability. It does not see the endurance. It does not see the courage. It does not see the child who learned to survive alone. But society rarely sees the truth with compassion, and it is here in the misunderstanding in the space between stigma and reality that the next layer of your story begins. Have you noticed how the world becomes uncomfortable when someone is simply with themselves? How silence is treated like a problem that needs to be fixed? How solitude is mistaken for sadness? We live in a society that fears the quiet mind, a culture that praises loudness, visibility, performance, the constant display of self for others to judge and approve. In such a world, speaking to yourself is seen not as intimacy with your inner life, but as something to be corrected, laughed at, or hidden. From a young age, you were taught that thinking should stay inside and feeling should be managed discreetly. You learn to keep your voice internal, your questions unspoken, your doubts smoothed over with socially acceptable smiles. People don't fear your words, they fear the honesty behind them. Because talking to yourself is raw, unfiltered. It reveals an inner world that cannot be curated for others. And we live in a time where identity itself has become performance, where value is measured by how well you fit into the expectations of the crowd. Society calls self-T talk strange because it reminds people of their own unspoken thoughts, the ones they spend their entire lives trying not to confront. So they label you to distance themselves from the discomfort. They call you lonely, as if companionship should always come from outside. They call you unstable, as if sanity is measured by silence. They call you weak, music, as if speaking to yourself is anything but an act of endurance. And yet throughout history, some of the greatest minds spoke to music themselves. Philosophers walking alone, under ancient skies, speaking music, their questions. Into the night, poets, whispering lines under their breath until meaning appeared. Scientists, artists, monks, warriors, people who understood that the deepest transformation happens in conversation, with music, the self. The inward voice has always been sacred. It is only modern culture that has tried to turn it into something embarrassing, because modern culture worships distraction, noise, constant engagement. It tells you that if you are not speaking to others, posting yourself, proving yourself, displaying yourself, then you do not exist. It tells you to replace introspection with consumption, emotion with entertainment, presence with performance. And in doing so, it disconnects you from the only relationship that lasts your entire life, the relationship with yourself. So, You learn to hide the voice, to speak only when no one is around, to pretend you don't need to hear yourself. But there is a cost to living with a voice no one else hears. A slow erosion of the alablos. Part of you that remembers who you truly blow are beneath the image, beneath the performance, beneath the world's expectations. And that cost reveals itself in the quietest place of all, the emotional toll you carry alone. Have you ever felt like your own mind has become both your refuge and your prison? Like the only place you can speak honestly is inside yourself? Yet that very place is also where your doubts, music, echo the loudest, the inner voice that once protected. You can become the battlefield where your past and present collide. There are moments when the voice is gentle, when it holds you the way no one ever did. When it reminds you to breathe, to soften your shoulders, to try again tomorrow. In these moments, the voice is a sanctuary, a quiet room inside your chest where the world cannot reach you. It becomes the proof that you have never truly abandoned yourself, even when others did. But there are nights when that same voice turns sharp, when it becomes the echo of every disappointment, every unspoken fear, every painful memory you hoped time would erase. It tells you you're not enough. It replays every mistake like a film loop that refuses to fade. It calls your name in a tone you learned from, someone who once made you feel small. The inner voice becomes your shadow, the version of you built out of every wound you carried silently. Over time, this shapes you not just emotionally, but relationally. Music, when you learn to lean on your own voice for comfort, other people can begin to praklio, feel unnecessary, or worse, unsafe. You may hesitate to explain yourself music because the voice already understands. You may withdraw from others because the voice is easier to speak to. You may find yourself living behind walls made of your own thoughts. Walls even you sometimes struggle to climb out of. Attachment theory tells us that intimacy is learned through being seen and soothed by another. But if you rarely receive that, if the world taught you to rely only on yourself, then your voice becomes the stand-in for love, a memory of the connection you always wished for, a companion shaped from the absence of others. And in that sense, the voice is both miracle and wound, proof of survival and evidence of what you had to survive. This can affect your identity. You begin to question who you are outside the realm of your inner alleyway world. Your self-worth can become tangled in the voice approval or criticism. You may fear vulnerability because letting someone else in means risking the one stability you have, always known, the conversation within. And yet, music, this story does not end in tragedy, because the same voice that once carried your loneliness can also guide you back to yourself. If you learn not just to hear it, but to understand it, music. If you listen differently, with compassion instead of fear, the voice stops being the battleground and becomes the bridge, a bridge to healing. Have you noticed that the voice inside you changes depending on how you speak to it? The same inner companion that once reassured you can become harsh when spoken to with impatience, and the same voice that once frightened you can soften if approached gently. The goal has never been to silence this voice. It has always been to understand, to turn it from a reaction into a relationship. Healing begins when you stop treating the voice as a problem and start treating it as a message. The next time you hear yourself whisper something in the quiet pause, listen, not with judgment, not with panic, but with curiosity. Ask yourself, who is speaking right now? The child who once felt alone? The adult who is tired of carrying everything? The heart that wants to be held, but has never been shown how. The voice is not random. It is memory shaped into music language. Psychologists refer to this as inner repairing, learning to give yourself the emotional presence you needed when you were younger. When you say it's okay to yourself, you are stepping into the role of the parent you wished music you had. When you speak to yourself with patience instead of frustration, you are repairing the bond between your past and present music self. You are becoming the one who stays. You can begin to guide the voice instead of reacting to it. When fear rises and the voice trembles, speak softly, I hear you. When doubt sharpens into criticism, respond with steadiness, I am trying. When loneliness echoes through your thoughts, remind yourself, I am here with you. This is not delusion. This is self-compassion. The emotional oxygen mask every human needs, but few are taught how to use. Journaling can help give the voice shape. Writing allows the intangible to become visible. When you place your thoughts on a page, the chaos becomes a landscape you can navigate. You no longer drown in the feeling. You can walk through it, map it, understand where it comes from. Music, the page, becomes a mirror that does not judge. And slowly something shifts. The voice becomes less of a battleground and more of a dialogue. You stop running from yourself. You stop fearing your own inner world. The voice that once felt like a burden becomes a music companion. Not perfect, not always calm, but honest. And honesty is where healing begins. Music, because the voice inside you has never been your enemy. It has always been the part of you that refused to disappear, even when life tried to silence it. And now, as we approach the end of this journey, there is one final truth to understand, and the one that brings everything together. Have you ever realized that the voice inside you is older than your memories? It has lived through every silence you endured, every moment you swallowed your feelings to keep the peace, every time you walked away when you wanted to stay, or stayed when you desperately needed to leave. It is the voice that never left you, even when others did. This voice has witnessed the quiet heartbreaks, the ones that left no visible bruise, but changed you forever. It remembers the first moment you felt misunderstood, the first time you pretended not to care, the first night you cried quietly so no one would hear, the first time you realized that the world does not always offer gentleness, music, even to those who give it. And through all of it, it stayed. It spoke. It kept you company in the places no one else could enter. The two voice inside you is not a flaw. It is a testament, a living archive, a memory woven into sound. When you speak to yourself today, you are not merely thinking you are tending to the child you once were, the teenager who felt too much, the adult who learned to carry themselves through storms. You are acknowledging the parts of you that survived without applause, without witness, without reassurance. You are giving language to the experiences that shaped you in silence. And yes, sometimes the voice trembles. Sometimes it carries anger. Sometimes it echoes regret. But even that is a form of love, because pain only speaks when it wants to be healed. Your inner voice is not trying to control you. It is trying to reach you. It wants you to notice the places where you are still hurting. It wants you to recognize the strength you built on your own. It wants you to understand that you never walked alone, even in the loneliest moments. So the next time you find yourself whispering in an empty room, do not rush to silence it. Do not call yourself strange. Do not feel ashamed. Listen, really listen. You are hearing the truth of your own music, existence. If you speak to yourself, it is because part of you is still trying to be heard, because part of you is still healing, because part of you still remembers what it felt like to be unseen and refuses to let that be the person End of the story. Music? There is nothing crazy about that. In fact, it is profoundly human. You have been your own witness, your own comfort, your own home. And now you know why you are not talking to yourself. You are returning to music yourself.